This is No Love in War, a story of Christian nationalism.
Awful smoke for
Written by Valerie H. Hobbs. Read by the author. With original music by Jonathan and Caroline Hodges. Originally published in open access print form by Mayfly Books. This book is dedicated to all who suffer violence in religious communities with visions of empire, to all whose homes are sites of war. Prologue. As I write this essay, the Christian Reconstructionist Chalcedon Foundation is celebrating the 50th anniversary of its establishment by Roussos John Rushdoony. And in some ways, the movement he built is just now coming into its own. Julie Ingersoll, 2014. The Christian Reconstructionist Movement in U.S. Politics. Oxford Handbook Topics in Religion. I was born in a wilderness end times cult in Alaska in the 1970s, after which I spent most of my childhood in a Christian Reconstructionist church and school, and then in a conservative Christian college, led by some of the key players that laid the foundation for the Christian right in the United States. Extremist politicians and religious leaders instrumental in paving the way for the election of Donald Trump and the violent political insurrection at the U.S. Capitol building in 2021. To this day, I have resisted telling certain parts of my past, even to myself. Initially, traumatizing events can, like corpses, sink rapidly to the deepest seabed of one's memory, until, having decomposed, they rise with sudden buoyancy, triggered sometimes by even the most innocuous or seemingly unrelated event, word, smell, sound, touch. The sight of their decay is startling. I'm old enough now to have been surprised a few times by this, by the unexpected ascent of some putrefied relic from the past I've carried around unconsciously for decades. It's astonishing, after so many years, to discover such consequential things about oneself. How quickly the world can be reshaped, and we in it, and at so late an hour. For example, of all the artifacts from my childhood, I first threw away a certain packet of letters in the immaturity of early marriage. The oddness of this act now intrigues me. Why throw out these letters especially? I kept other things. A card from a controlling childhood friend, a blue Trinity hymnal with a personal inscription from a Christian Reconstructionist friend I regularly cycled with at university. Photos of awkward dates with domineering men to spring and Christmas banquets at university. All these I kept, and I can't now remember a single word on the letters I threw away. Only the particular curve of the handwriting and the thickness of each envelope, holding all those pages and pages. I question myself on this. I sit with curiosity among my choices. Why did I let those letters go? Why did I instead preserve other relics of past relationships? I now look at the images I've carried with me, the objects, the notes and cards, this bulky baggage I've brought even across the ocean. And I feel nothing. I see that perhaps keeping them facilitated a kind of desensitization therapy. By and by, I stopped involuntarily cringing at how I had again and again been treated as prey by men of war who sharpened the knives of their ascendant worldview on the most vulnerable. Perhaps if I'd discarded all these mementos of harm too soon, I'd have denied myself the time it takes to revise and rewrite their meaning, to transform my relationship to them, to empty them of their destructive power. And it does take time, so much time. I'm on the long road, feet forward, one step at a time. Yes, those letters I discarded. I can't stop thinking about them. I have tried so many times to remember their content, even a single phrase. Nothing doing. Is this for the best? If I read them now, they'd likely turn me inside out. I'd not be able to bear up under their weightiness, all that meaning multiplied and magnified in inverse proportion to the gradual disappearance into irrelevance of the once hurtful artifacts I still hold on to. Seeing such love across so many pages, a secret seed sown in my oblivious heart, spread out and flourishing over the years. From such a sight would spring such agonizing knowledge of all my ignorance, my complicity in so much evil, so much war along the way. This would crush me, like grapes trodden in the great winepress of the wrath of God. And what would flow out? I don't know. Only that I will no longer submit to being stunted and silent. For there is nothing worth keeping that would also hinder me from telling the truth. In telling these stories, there is nothing I might lose that I haven't already lost. And I have already lost so much. Writing history is, after all, not simply a matter of cataloging chronology. This happened, then after this another thing took place, we went here, when you were this old we moved to this place. Someone said this and that. Here are the conversations and actions that followed. Some people saw it like this, others like that. A full and fully frozen, seemingly impartial account of all the facts. A self-deprecating set of statements throughout, naming all known bias. A linear presentation of every key life event. A survey of every sample. Add it all up, and we all cancel each other out. No one is to blame for all this violence. Anyone involved in any way, and by that, of course, we mean anyone of consequence, should be able to read it and agree, yes, that's what happened. That's how it was. Like gods, we dispassionately chronicle our collective past. These are the records of the generations of Noah, the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Yet this is what people seem to want. The illusion of a perfectly balanced zero-sum equation. Or at least some triumphant arc. No need to imagine the unimaginable. No pressure to bear the unbearable. No call to speak the unspeakable. You only speak to the unhappy victims. You never speak to the happy ones. Tim Thornton, bishop at Lambeth, once said to Andrew Greystone, author of a book on notorious pedophilic abuser John Smith. Bishop Thornton supposedly, quote, knew thousands of victims of abuse who were happy with the way they have been treated by the church. Popular American conservative theologian, author, and pastor Kevin DeYoung recently recommended Crawford Gribben's scholarly book on Christian Reconstruction as a, quote, fair-minded contemporary historical research, as opposed to advocacy historiography. According to DeYoung, Gribben's answers historical questions about Christian Reconstructionist leaders without judging them as good or bad or something in between. A now former Christian colleague speaks condescendingly of any biographies but these, pressures me to be more critical in my review of one woman's account of spousal abuse, Without 2 or 3 man-witnesses, no story can be confirmed. Yet he too tells tales hinging on his own perspective when it suits, when it fits the framework he desires to preserve. Oh, do you remember that time? Doesn't this look just like? Funny you should mention. Have I told you about the time I... Prompted by the sight of some familiar place, some suggestive scent, an expression, a flavor, the sight of someone doing this or that. This is his privilege, as man, as religious leader, to speak with authority about the way things were and are, to weigh in, to select which versions of which stories to record and pass on and deem universally true. The histories written about the movements I have been involved in proclaim to me that it's voices like his which take priority. They subtly or even overtly erase the voices of women, of the marginalized, and of the violence done to us. I've read their accounts, and I know what is missing. I know what hides in the cracks. I know. Whether accidentally or on purpose, the gaps they leave gape at me like wounds that are never sewn up. They are crying out to be seen, to be wept over, to be soothed and healed. In the absence of this telling, this listening, this learning, the past follows us. Its desperate fingers hold the hem of our garments. It will not let us go. What sense is there in withholding a life-saving story until after the death of its characters? What kindness can there possibly be in refusing restorative medicine to the dying? I must give heed to myself and keep my soul diligently, so that I do not forget the things my eyes have seen, so they do not depart from me all the days of my life. I will make them known to my children and grandchildren, to my friends, to anyone who asks. Telling stories is, in any case, one way we signal our suppressed citizenship. Our words plant our feet in the substance of the planet just so. My history is a part of its history. I too belong here. I have eyes and ears and a mouth. I was there in those places. What happens to me matters. I matter. The scholar Cheryl Glenn wrote in 2000 that, quote, writing women, or any other traditionally disenfranchised group, into the history of rhetoric can be an ethically and intellectually responsible gesture that disrupts those frozen memories in order to address silences, challenge absences, and assert women's contributions to public life. This book is one such gesture, deliberately disruptive of other work, like that of Gribben and DeYoung, on the subject of Christian Reconstructionism and Dominionist theology, in that it is unapologetically focused on a woman's voice and perspective, backgrounding the recorded macro-history of religious political events and foregrounding women's personal history. The wars religious supremacists wage against the world, read against the wars at home. For the uninitiated into Christian Reconstructionism and other arms of the Christian Dominionist movement in the United States and beyond, Julie Ingersoll accurately summarizes the central goal of this cluster of political ideologies as, quote, establishing the kingdom on earth to prepare for Christ's return required Christians to transform the world, or take dominion, a view that became an article of faith for the religious right, which popularized versions of postmillennialism as dominion or kingdom now theology. Christian dominionism runs across the theological spectrum, from the intellectually high-minded Calvinist Christian Reconstructionism, still popular in orthodox branches of conservative Christianity, to the more spirit-led charismatic and Pentecostal Kingdom Now and New Apostolic Reformation movements currently sweeping the world via such institutions as Brian Houston's Hillsong Church. Recently, Ruth Braunstein has devastatingly captured the pivotal role of the cultivation of a white evangelical myth of Christians under siege by a godless pluralistic culture in radicalizing this wide range of mostly white evangelical Christians to a Dominionist mindset. This myth has been immensely effective in fostering communal commitment and extremist values and lifestyle, writes Braunstein, and, quote, despite public infighting, white evangelicals appear to be extremely unified and mobilized, and at the center of conservative power structures. Yet we must acknowledge that underneath this facade of cooperation lies a pattern of exploitation, enacted through violence, not just of Christian Dominionists' perceived enemies, but of the very base that they claim to serve. It is the everyday stories of this hidden warfare that this book documents. The book is organized into 4 main sections: land, grave, fire, and womb. Themes derived from the Bible's book of Proverbs, chapter 30, verses 15 to 16, which illustrate that insatiable attitude, that greedy, demanding desire for more and more that dominates and destroys the earth and all it contains. Where Christian Dominionists live by gluttony for power, imagining themselves as soldiers in a war between the righteous and the evil ones, between believers and unbelievers, this book exposes the underbelly of such a narrative, the perpetuation of intergenerational violence between aggressors and survivors and everyone in between within Dominionists' very own communities. Key to the telling of this story is the deliberately crude use of the biblical text to demonstrate its weaponization in the mouths of abusers. And what do I hope will come about by means of this book? As we inscribe all such suppressed stories into the public memory, over time, links appear across each known encounter with the world, then pathways, possible shapes. We thread them into constellations, a map of our life written in stars. Catching sight of the matrix we've modeled, aha! Other weary travelers now thread a line between their points across the night sky. Join my constellations with yours, adding detail to each shape, a fuller map of what it is to be human, a guide for ourselves and others after us, chock full of all the mess and mistakes, all the contradictions common to this chaotic life under the sun. Together we find ourselves, we find others, now we are less alone. In the future, the next generation will ask, what do these constellations mean? Then we can tell them, this is how war begins. This is where we lost our way. These are the moments I knew love. Now you too can locate yourself here, there. Now you can become one who has found peace. This has been No Love in War, a story of Christian nationalism. If you have appreciated this free audiobook and would like to make a donation to the author, please visit this podcast's Spotify site. This is No Love in War, a story of Christian nationalism.
Awful smoke for
Written by Valerie H. Hobbs. Read by the author. With original music by Jonathan and Caroline Hodges.
in my world.
Originally published in open access print form by Mayfly Books. Part 1. Land. There are 3 things that will not be satisfied, 4 that will not say enough. Land that is never satisfied with water. Proverbs chapter 30, verses 15 to 16.
What's that you're reading about the bed where you sleep?
Chapter 1. We help our students understand that no area of life can be separated from God, that no fact can be understood apart from God, and that truth and knowledge cannot be acquired except under the direction of God's written revelation. As our students learn how to build a Christian culture in home, school, church, state, and society, they will guarantee for themselves and their children the prosperity, strength, and peace that God brings to His faithful people. Chalcedon Christian School, Council of Chalcedon, 1987, Issue 1. My parents used to tell us of one day in a long winter in our wilderness commune. One of the few stories they share about those years in the cold, in the dark, in the cult. A pack of starving wolves circled our cabin in the night, hunting a way in. My brother heard them howl, lifted the latch of our cabin door to go out and see. He would have been dragged away, dog's dinner, except that one parent snatched him back quickly, and the other slammed the door. This story they elect to tell, the one where only animals are predators, never humans. I was 6 years old when I began to be hunted, or at least this is when I began to perceive that killers lived, moved, and had their being around me, squinting, spying, dissecting, and determining my uses in their inherited kingdoms. By then we'd left our commune behind, traded a remote wilderness in the Pacific Northwest for an urban one in the Atlantic Southeast, arriving to this new semblance of civilization with little but the clothes on our backs, the only worldly possessions that humans banished from paradise could personally claim. Members of our extended family paid for our flights, took us in. No one spoke of where we'd been. Here we are now. Finally, they're here, safely back home. My brother and I discovered television at our aunt's house and began watching episodes of Little House on the Prairie. It seems curious now. In a sense, we were watching ourselves, peering through the window of the black and white television into an idealized pastoral scene of the place we'd only just come from. The jolly Ingalls family in their snug cabin. A subtle and almost immediate early rewrite of our history. Not long ago, a niece described my parents as homesteaders, brave pioneers who embraced harmony with nature, the simple, sustainable life. How rosy and romantic it all seemed now, viewed admiringly, enviously, translated into the nostalgic fantasy of cottagecore. After our exodus from that place I knew then only as the land, my father was gone day and night until we had enough savings for a small apartment with shag carpet. My bed bunked below my brother's. My grandmother bringing caramel candies, coming to spend nights on the sofa when my sister was born, until my father said he'd rather she went back to her own home. Alongside a few other refugees who'd likewise fled the brutal Northwest, we attended charismatic church meetings where spirit-filled men and women spontaneously danced in the aisles, cried and laughed, made a holy racket all together. I saw one woman fling off her shoes in excitement, so eager was she to praise her God's name with dancing. While there, I made a friend, until one evening when she jostled a pot of boiling water from the stove, scalding most of her body. I heard then of a special kind of pool for third-degree burn victims. Naively, I imagined my friend swimming happily round and round in circles several times a day in her private pool. So lucky. My brother and I played with the other children in our apartment complex, kicked a ball around a plot of grass in the square, threw a frisbee, ran races. It snowed heavily one year, and our dad built an igloo, his impulse always to erect structures around us. We walked with our mother to the Food Lion for canned fruit cocktail, jarred Vienna sausages, and Campbell's chicken noodle soup, the epitome of luxury. I cut out images from newspapers and coupon catalogs to fill in handmade paper books, one for each letter of the alphabet. A is for apple, B is for beans, 5 cans for $1, this week only. We got to know a man called Gary in an adjoining building who kept a pet squirrel in a closet. We acquired a spring-mounted rocking horse from a nearby landfill, the holes in her ears a bank where we deposited the only cash we kids had to hand, green leaves and water as petrol to send her bouncing on her way to nowhere, sloshing as she went. At age 4, I began attending a Baptist kindergarten a few mornings a week. My first teacher banged her scissors in anger so often and with such force it formed a small crater on the corner of her desk, melding her name within the moon of my memory of that place. Mrs. G. for Groceries Grant, the only teacher there I can now recall. In October that year and the next, at my mother's request and the teacher's special dispensation, I sat alone in the principal's office and played with a box of toys, while my peers sang Halloween songs and assembled spooky crafts. In this and other ways, my parents carried on separating us out from the world. Out of my father's absence eventually emerged a house, the second he'd built for us himself after our little cabin in the woods. Now we moved further out from the suburbs into the countryside, where land was cheap and neighbors more distant, a situation my parents seemed still to prefer. My sister and I arranged our belongings in a pink room next door to my brother's, twin beds, matching chenille bedspreads from my grandmother's house, an angled walk-in closet, a box fan in the window, a doll's house, a Fisher-Price record player likewise rescued from the local landfill. Now it was my first year in full-time education, the first grade at a small Christian school several exits down the state highway, heading south towards the city from our house. The headmaster had told my mother that his was a high-achieving, strict school, so I spent the summer before in a makeshift classroom in my bedroom, being prepped. Perhaps my handwriting wasn't good enough. Perhaps my spelling needed work. Also, my reading was poor. I saw then that the business of the world was measurement. Already I had been weighed out on the scales and found deficient. All the weights of the bag were now my concern. I traced between dots to form letters, enrolled in a summer reading program at the library. Free spaghetti dinner if you read 10 books. The first one I finished on my own was Benjamin in the Woods, the story of a boy's adventures with animals as he grows up in his pioneer family's cabin in the forest. Each morning, around 30 pupils came, in vans, carpools, and family automobiles, from miles in every direction. A zealous trek our church school magazine, the Council of Chalcedon, would later boast over in its inaugural issue. We assembled in the building of a Christian Reconstructionist church we'd been required to join as a condition of my mother's employment as teacher. Our headmaster, an elder in the church, believed in typical patriarchal fashion that fathers were ultimately responsible for children's education. He said as much, more than once and clearly. But our school had been founded by a, quote, sponsoring church. And so we were all, teachers and students, under another higher authority, that of the church's governmental structure, principally the pastor patriarch. This was part of the detailed advice that attorney John Whitehead, founder of the Rutherford Institute, had given our pastor and others intending to start kingdom schools without scrutiny from the state, to protect them from legal attack by, quote, clever prosecutors. Among the points of his advice were that, number 1, the Christian school should never be separately incorporated from the church. Number 2, the financial statements of the day school should show the day school as a ministry on the same level as other ministries of the church. Number 3, the church treasurer should write the checks and control the funds that flow in and out of all ministries of the church, including the day school. Number 4, if at all possible, it is advisable that all ministries use the same physical plant facilities. Number 5, if a church holds to a particular belief that is liable to be contested by the state, then it should be codified with supporting scripture in the church constitution. Number 6, the school name should be virtually the same as the church name and should include the doctrine, if possible, taught in the church. Number 7, the governing board of the church should govern all ministries, including the day school. Number 8, teacher contracts present a unique problem. If the church treats the day school teacher as a minister of the gospel, then it may be inconsistent to have the teacher under contract. Number 9, there is a problem with church leaders who have their children in the public schools. We kids didn't know anything of the strategies at work here, but we certainly sensed the structure of say-so, tacitly taught to us when the pastor emerged from his study to use the restrooms he shared with us, to talk down to some teacher, to rebuke us for being too loud, too quiet, too slow, not slow enough, for saying, "Damn, God will damn you to hell." Still, being employed by the school granted my mother a discount on tuition fees, so I guess you could say our church membership came by means of a bribe. My siblings and I got baptized then, a spectacle among people that typically witnessed water sprinkled only over babies. My parents promised unreservedly to dedicate us to God, to set before us a godly example, to pray with and for us, that they would teach us the doctrines of our holy religion, and that they would strive, by all the means of God's appointment, to bring us up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. The feeling of the pastor's hand on my head, even after he stepped away, it seemed his appendage never left, a pressure that I can recall to this day with terrible accuracy. Other kids gathered around me afterwards and felt my damp hair. There was some scandalous story here, these strangers who didn't know better before now. Some failure to find out, slow learners, so much catching up to do. Until then, the spheres of home, church, and school overlapped only on me. Even my siblings hadn't attended my kindergarten, granting rest from the regular squabbling that comes naturally from living and growing up in close proximity. Now, all such boundaries began to dissolve dangerously, and there was nowhere to escape. This has been No Love in War, a story of Christian nationalism.
My turn till you're
If you have appreciated this free audiobook and would like to make a donation to the author, please visit this podcast's Spotify site. This is No Love in War, a story of Christian nationalism.
Awful smoke for a rebel.
Written by Valerie H. Hobbs. Read by the author. With original music by Jonathan and Caroline Hodges. Originally published in open access print form by Mayfly Books. Chapter 2. Some people, entering our place of worship, are amazed at the plainness at the front of our church. Behind the pulpit is a large blank wall. A modest communion table sits on the floor in front of the pulpit. There are no pictures of Jesus, certainly, but also no crosses, no flags, nothing. We do not even have flowers regularly at the front of the sanctuary. Editor's note, The Council of Chalcedon, 1998, Issue 9. Then they said to each other, "Come, let's make bricks and bake them thoroughly." They used brick instead of stone, and tar for mortar. Genesis chapter 11, verse 3. The corridors and corners of the church school are still in my dreams. Below an excessive church sanctuary, a foyer at the front with stairs to the balcony, at the side a church kitchen and restrooms. Underneath these lay a collection of small classrooms, concrete block walls painted white. Fiberglass drop ceilings, also white, enclosed the roof. Thin stained carpet of some unmemorable shade covered a cement floor. Flickering fluorescent tubes created pockets of insensitive light and shadow. Perhaps there were some images on the walls at times in certain rooms. Teachers at that time created seasonal bulletin boards, and Christian schools sanctified them with aspirational Bible verses. "I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me," inscribed in a teacher's precise hand on construction paper leaves to mark autumn's return. "Behold, I make all things new," for spring. But I can remember nothing much of color, only that the rooms seemed perpetually dismal, the corridors even more so. After all, one's memory of spaces is largely shaped by how we felt in them. The foggiest morning can fix vividly in our minds in every shade of the rainbow, just as the wildest of pinks, the most brilliant of blues, can store mentally in a spectrum of grayscale, filtered through the lens of despair. Even the outdoor space surrounding the 2-story brick building seemed to take on its demeanor. I now embellish my home with color, every empty space with some rare houseplant, every spare scent garnishes my garden. From then I can't recall a single flower or glossy leaf, only the thorniest and most persistent weeds and brambles, a wood of pine trees typical of the area, the only living things undeterred by the impenetrable red clay that lay heavy and undisturbed around the ambitiously wide asphalt parking lot. Such ugliness sprung from so much arrogance. I've held on to one of my favorite children's books from that time, bought for pennies in a library sale. The Plant Sitter, a story about a boy called Tommy who looks after a host of plants one summer. So many they fill his house to bursting. "Oh my," groans his mother, "how terrible." "What's this nonsense?" Tommy's father roars. "This can't go on." He frowns these words over his breakfast. surrounded by a dense kitchen forest, as Tommy sits beaming. On one memorable page, Tommy falls asleep in the bath, now a pool in a tropical foliage jungle. On another, he runs on his own to the library, then a garden center, grows cuttings of every plant, then gives them away to all his neighbors. Tommy thought it was wonderful. All this I treasured. I pondered it in my heart. The stairwell connecting the school below with the church above was a particularly menacing place, windowless and joined at the ends by cheap fire doors with panic bars that clapped loudly when pushed. I rarely walked the stairs, only dashed up and down instinctively when I had occasion to travel alone, fearing that someone sat waiting for me in the hunting blind, that sinister void underneath the stairs' middle turn. The sound of my steps echoed and chased me as I ran, confusing and merging my fear of the hunter with a growing unease of myself. The bathrooms were conveniently and inconveniently located just outside the top and bottom of the stairwell. If after emerging I saw someone I wanted to avoid, I could quickly burrow into the girls' bathroom, but I had to be quick. Some boys took to pouncing on passing girls and pushing them through the swinging door to the boys' bathroom. "Did you see anything you liked?" they'd hoot when she emerged. A quick dose of humiliation. One time, one of the kinder boys surprised me with his presence just outside the stairwell, his arm outstretched to push ajar the now open door. This posture was too ambiguous to disarm my defenses. My hand sprung out and slapped him, hard. Our faces fixed into the same sad, startled expression, gazing at each other as if in a mirror. Another time, a boy got his hand caught in the hinge of the heavy, self-closing door to the men's bathroom. He screamed and held it up urgently in the air for us all to witness, angry and weeping red lines now traversing each finger below the nail. There were 4 or 5 classrooms only in those early years, 2 year groups combined in each, K4 and K5, 1 and 2, 3 and 4, 5 and 6. When it rained, all classes would assemble together in a central common room and play chess on whiteboards painted onto long folding tables with dingy wood veneer tops. Our headmaster for some time developed aspirations of discovering the next Bobby Fischer, but with a difference. Through the coercive power of chess, surely one of us would conquer the communist Soviets for Christ. We had no one to teach us really, yet we played at it until his attention turned. These ambitious tables were also our lunch space, a study hall space, cleared away after school for martial arts instruction for boys, ballet for girls. When not even a single desk more could be squeezed into the narrow classrooms, a cheap partition appeared, separating off a portion of this central room to create a new, equally pinched teaching space for grades 3 and 4, now enclosing the entrance to a separate office space. The convenience of this room within a room facilitated an increase in corporal punishment. Here was where I received my first school smacking for the gravest of sins, being disrespectful. I dared to declare my distaste for mayonnaise on Burger King Whoppers, as our teacher took our order for lunch on some class trip. Other teachers without access to such private penal spaces sent most errant children out into the hallway to be verbally vanquished with a Bible verse, though repeat offenders would be sent to the headmaster's office for a smack, or even sometimes to the church office, a suite of rooms leading to the pastor's study, also accessed via the common area. I never knew what happened then. The spaces between the immovable concrete walls seemed always to be changing shape and character unpredictably. We were rodents in a maze, test subjects in some psychological experiment. The headmaster dragged in a stained carpet he'd found by the side of the road, only discarding it once we complained of fleas crawling up our legs during lessons. He regularly paused lessons for class field trips to the local DIY store. We wandered the aisles while he purchased supplies for some school building project. Another particularly memorable school trip was an all-day recording session for a Christian music album for the sister-in-law of our pastor. "Why can't I see God?" we warbled obediently. "Is he watching me?" The children of the most important church families sang solos and duets, while the rest of us with bit parts sat in a corridor most of the day, late into the afternoon and evening. Our day dissolved into child labor for the kingdom coming. My first desk at school was in the far corner of the first and second grade classroom, and I recall a view out of the facing windows towards the swings that held me up to the sky on rainless days. At break times, I pumped my legs harder and faster until up and down swapped places, and my legs now dangled over a canyon of clouds. My peers pumped alongside me. Some jumped at the top of their arc. If they landed without falling over, everyone would cheer. The most skilled knew how to propel their bodies forward just so, to hit the ground ready to run. I never joined in. I imagined if I leapt, I'd fall into a void, plunge endlessly towards heaven's blue and bottomless pit, beneath the fixed roof of the earth, where my classmates now moved about upside down. Almost every day, I terrified myself in this way. I loved the outdoors, especially its impartial hiding places. The precious hours between school days I spent playing in the creek and the deep woods around our house, cycling around the loop of our small neighborhood, pedaling desperately alongside my older brother and a neighbor boy. I'd keep up with them. I would. My thoughts didn't linger yet on matters of identity or bodies, or how the two might be related. A few curious incidents had happened already here and there, but none that unsettled me memorably beyond the joys of play and discovery. Such was our happy, genderless existence. Until one morning. The event was this. A boy wrote, "Valerie is a foxy lady," on the outside of his notebook, in big, bold letters. To my tiny body on that day, there was no physical violence, nor even the sound of an unkind or ambivalent voice, just a bit of cheeky fun, no harm done. A friend even pointed the easily visible words out to me eagerly, as if I'd be pleased. My name enshrined with boyish desire for all to see. My first conquest. Except I wasn't grateful. Some secret alarm began to ring in my ears. Enraged, I marched confidently to the boy's desk and belted out that he'd better rub out my name or else I'd squeeze him till he shriveled up like a hot dog in a bun. My hands fleshed out my meaning, menacingly forming the shape of his neck. I remember his face, so blank. This reaction, this rejection, perhaps, was new. This memory is mapped on my mind mainly because of what happened next. The sound of the teacher's gasp, and then her cheeks, hot with disapproval, and something else I couldn't then comprehend. She pointed to the door, and I exited in front of her in confusion and fear, the boy now smirking in his seat. "Don't talk about hot dogs and buns. You sound like you're threatening to perform a lewd act. Don't you know your body parts are like a bun, and his a sausage? You have behaved so inappropriately. You must be more ladylike in future." "Yes, ma'am." I said nothing more in reply. The look on her face, I now know its name. A dense and clumsy baggage she promptly deposited over me in hushed urgency in the narrow hallway outside the classroom that morning. I received it upon my head as a millstone. It bullied its way into my heart, feasted on my flesh, and took root. The undead seed of women's plight in this place, perhaps joining other similar contaminants I'd not known were already there. Beacons for all trackers. I remember only that shame and its lesson, nothing else after. I can't recall ever speaking to that boy again, as small as our school was. I could never have articulated the meaning of all this then, but any child can grasp the lesson. No hunter would be blamed for tracking me. All resistance would be condemned. She is an animal, and will be treated as animals are. Little foxes are ruining the vineyards. Catch the foxes for us, while our vineyards are in blossom. Break them in, kill, and swallow them whole.
Living on borrowed time. You're laughing on borrowed time.
This has been No Love in War, a story of Christian nationalism.
My time till you're done.
If you have appreciated this free audiobook and would like to make a donation to the author, please visit this podcast's Spotify site. This is No Love in War, a story of Christian nationalism.
Awful smoke for a rebel.
Written by Valerie H. Hobbs. Read by the author. With original music by Jonathan and Caroline Hodges. Originally published in open access print form by Mayfly Books. Chapter 3. The central area of dominion is thus not politics nor economics, but the family under God. The family as a social organization is the prime area of dominion. It has far more than personal significance. R.J. Rushdoony, Marriage and the Family, The Council of Chalcedon, 1989, Issue 7. All things considered, my home wasn't the best of homes, but neither was it the worst. That house that Dad built. We had rooms to sleep in. We had plenty to eat. We had books and toys, a tree house, the freedom to explore the creek and the woods around our house. We went weekly to the library. We visited the playground in the local park. We had well-meaning parents of that generation that emphasized tough love, independence, being seen and not heard, working within the system rather than calling attention to it. Keep your head down and get on with it. Don't make a fuss. In some ways, then, perhaps our home was somewhat typical. Still, we had some strangeness, which sometimes I became painfully aware of when spending time with extended family or when out and about. There was always some distance there, some separation. I sensed this space from pursed lips, glances. There were things certain family members didn't say. Maybe our cousins had been instructed on how to interact with us. If they mentioned something about such and such, here are 3 neutral things you can say. In the summer, thanks to my grandmother's generosity, we shared a house with our extended family at the beach for a week, our family always occupying the furthest basement rooms, our father nearly always insisting we set off somewhere on our own some days, instead of joining in with the group. Sometimes he stayed home to work, and the rest of us went alone to reaffirm our blood connections. Too much time spent with others, especially with family. This seemed to unsettle my dad. Yet this perpetual gap that yawned between any one of us and any other person existed within the walls of our home as well. For years, my dad made us scrambled eggs in the morning. We ate thrifty meals around a kitchen table in the evenings. But as the years went by, we ate together less and less often, didn't talk about anything much, didn't really know one another, like most people who carry the weight of untold stories. To open our mouths too widely or too often was to risk talking about something unmentionable, embarrassing. Better to avert our eyes, go about our days and our duties with minimal contact, keep conversation light, keep it infrequent. We passed the time together always busy with some task, pulling weeds or house cleaning, pursuing some hobby, the frenzy of our hands using up every ounce of our energy, sapping all our focus. In the moments between, at breakfast for instance, we seemed incessantly to be searching for some text to hold our gaze, to disrupt any overly lengthy eye contact. A cereal box, a pamphlet, a book, a Christian newsletter. I read so many dull papers in those days, so many fundamentalist film and book reviews. In all this, our violence simmered passive-aggressively, always lurking just beneath a veneer of supreme outward mismanners politeness. We were opposing forces, living alongside one another in tension, the stresses within and between us building internally, until occasionally they exploded unexpectedly. Here a chair thrown across the room, there a voice yelling, a household item rapidly repurposed as a paddle, leaving me and my siblings deeply insecure, mistrusted and mistrusting, generally tight-lipped. We maneuvered our everyday life like water bugs, traversing the delicate viscosity of a murky pond's surface. In the early months of life in our country neighborhood, a little brown crossbreed dog called Smiley bit my stomach badly, and my father swore, something he didn't often do in our presence, and threatened to go round and shoot the dog with the shotgun he kept under his bed, though he cooled down and the gun stayed put. After that, we interacted very little with our neighbors, apart from one boy, Michael, who came round nearly every day with his dog Bear. Michael's dad took us hunting for squirrels and treated us to a fried chicken lunch at Po Folks' restaurant some Sundays. In winter, he pulled our sleds wildly around the neighborhood behind his truck when it snowed. He earned his money driving around all day collecting rent from his numerous tenants. My first encounter with the concept of landlord, an occupation we learned about by listening at doors. He was a tempestuous man, prone to outbursts and dramatic mood swings. He'd give Michael permission to go with us to the beach, to a theme park, to the city pool, then change his mind minutes before our departure. This was familiar territory, and dodging all his deceptive changes of direction kept me sharp for home life. With Michael, we practiced keeping our emotions in check, holding our faces straight as we rode the peaks and troughs of men's fragile moods. Michael had a younger stepsister, but we rarely saw her, and Michael had nothing good to say about his stepmother in the few times he spoke about her. At Christmas, she would send him over to deliver a tin of beautifully handmade cakes and candies. "She can't cook anything else. She's really a terrible cook," Michael would say, if we kids made even the tiniest show of awe or gratitude as he handed it over. If it happened to be me at the door, I took the parcel from him silently, solemnly, in the same somber way, returning to Michael or to his mailbox a handwritten thank you note from my mother. Instinctively, I deferred to Michael's lack of enthusiasm by mirroring it. We never heard anything of his biological mom. Nothing I can remember now, anyway. It was as if she'd never existed. Perhaps she was dead, or merely living nearby. Either or neither. We never knew. Michael, my brother, and I would often meet early in the morning and be gone all day, until Michael's father whistled to call him home. We could hear that sharp signal for miles. Wherever we were, Michael would start running. "Bear, come on, boy," he said urgently. He often wrestled and sometimes punched Bear, for reasons I couldn't then grasp. The mutt was altogether loyal, and bore his companion's beatings without complaint, receiving onto his furry flesh the punishment for whatever aggression that day, that week, had recently inflicted. Our home of mostly beige walls and carpet was nearly always tidy, systematically cleaned weekly from top to bottom, smelling of nothing. By then we had a yellow dog which my parents finally purchased from a local farmer, after the dog stubbornly adopted us by escaping her fence at every chance and coming to find us kids. I'm not sure what she saw in us. What canine knowledge did she possess that pulled her to our animal-unfriendly home? She was rarely allowed in the house, and especially not in the living room, though once my father said we could call her in for a family photo. Her whole body trembled then at his confusing violation of rules. I recall the picture now. My dad's hand round her neck, that unsettling flash of the whites of her eyes, glancing nervously to the side as dogs do when stressed. Occasionally I snuck her in to sleep under my bed, until her fleas established themselves in the carpet, and we were found out. When the temperature dipped below a certain level, she was allowed in the basement. One evening my dad arrived home before the rest of us and tried to enter the house through the basement door, as he often did. His work equipment was stored there. Only the dog refused to let him pass. She growled and barked at him until the rest of us returned, then lay down, reassured, and went to sleep. My sister and I took her on long walks all around the surrounding streets, but most of her life she spent tied to a dog run between two trees, some distance from the house. There she'd purposely tangle her lead around one tree or the other, desperate for a visit, a pat, a kind word, the repetition of her name. Eventually she began to display signs of regret for placing her hopes in us, escaping from our backyard, at every opportunity sniffing and searching the neighborhood for someone worthy of her devotion. We'd roam the neighborhood calling her name, carrying bread to tempt her home, hoping she was hungry enough to be enticed back again to us one more time. Growing up in this orderly, uneasy set of spaces, each of us began displaying signs of obsessive compulsiveness. My brother and sister developed a habit of placing one hand, palm up, under a ceiling fan pull, then giving it a slight bump towards the ceiling whenever either of them entered the room. For years, I never saw them move from one part of the house to another without performing this ritual. My sister and I became fixated on tidying our play kitchen just so after every game. In this way, all our play teetered anxiously on the horizon of the inevitable cleanup. The inclusion of each piece of plastic food we removed for our game was carefully calculated against the effort to replace it. Any mess seemed deeply out of place, unsettling. Once my sister set up all our stuffed toys for a game while I was at a friend's house, and upon seeing it, I berated her cruelly. I hadn't wanted to play, and now look at all this work. This has been No Love in War, a story of Christian nationalism. If you have appreciated this free audiobook and would like to make a donation to the author, please visit this podcast's Spotify site. This chapter contains depictions of violence against children. Listener discretion is advised. This is No Love in War, a story of Christian nationalism.
Awful smoke for
Written by Valerie H. Hobbs. Read by the author. With original music by Jonathan and Caroline Hodges. Originally published in open access print form by Mayfly Books. Chapter 4. Israel was fighting their oppressors. In this case, the bad guys were the Philistines. Deciding that they preferred to risk dying to serving a tyrannical civil government, the Israelites went to battle. But they were at a distinct disadvantage. The Philistines had their own handgun control incorporated. Rich Jefferson, Guns and the Bible, The Council of Chalcedon, 1989, Issue 6. Yet many Christians do not seem to understand the relationship between their values, beliefs, and behaviors and their economic situation. Some Christians seem to believe that wealth and prosperity are just an accident of situation. Even those called to the working class should expect, over time, monetary and career advancement by God's blessing. They should still expect to be, over time, ahead of their worldly counterparts through a combination of financial reward from their satisfied employers and godly frugality in their lifestyles. Brian Abshire, Restoring Christian Wealth, The Council of Chalcedon, 2003, Issue 2. My first friend at church school was Sophia, and the contrast of her home with mine set up a situation of extremes, another early signal of the push and pull that would figure so powerfully in our eat-or-be-eaten childhood. Sophia's family were loud, crass, stunning human specimens, exhibitionists and lovers of pleasure, to whom it seemed no one said no. They ate well and argued openly, sometimes coming to blows. Her house had things from faraway places: terracotta tiles in the kitchen, long fur coats, a mink stole, thick oriental rugs, a bidet. Sophia had a pet hamster in her bedroom, dogs and cats that came and went as they pleased. 2 puppies appeared one day, one of whom drowned in Sophia's swimming pool, the other eventually executed after mauling a postal worker. One night, Sophia and I sat reading, and my fingers played with a rubber band they'd found. "If you fall asleep with that in your bed, the cat will stretch it around your neck and steal your breath," Sophia warned solemnly. I believed everything she told me, already acquainted as she was with so many worlds beyond my experience, she of the future, and I always stuck stumbling behind in the past. She and her siblings tore at the corners of the wrapping paper to identify their Christmas presents in advance, and watched violent and sexually explicit films and television. "How bad was the language?" Sophia's mother asked us when we'd come back from the cinema, shrugging at Sophia's matter-of-fact reply. Sophia's father was a powerful figure on our small planet, which to me seemed somehow related to the hallowed matter of money. Whenever our pastor found occasion to preach on tithing, he would hold up certain men in the congregation as examples. "The kingdom of God is like one wealthy man who closed a business deal to the tune of a multi-million-dollar profit, then promptly put his gifts into the treasury, out of his surplus into the offering." To such men as these, who supplied some form of social or economic capital, our pastor awarded sacred prowess and near carte blanche. Their offspring were now children of the covenant, declared so by the power of preaching through the seal of the pulpit. This was another law of our hunting preserve. Every relationship was transactional. Some Sundays after the endless sermon, Sophia invited me to go to lunch with her family at a Japanese restaurant. The pastor and his family were often guests as well. Such was their privilege. Perhaps my parents were invited once or twice. Likely not. We rarely went out for a meal, except for the occasional fast food. My father felt awkward in social settings involving wealth and unknown food, places where no one comforted the uncomfortable, unease being one of rich men's finest delicacies. Sophia and I perched next to an enormous tropical fish tank, drank Shirley Temples, and dared each other to eat pieces of pickled ginger, while the men drank heavily and gorged themselves on slippery noodles and enormous platters of meat and vegetables. Consumption and dyspepsia, such was the Sabbath scene. Having only ever seen my parents drink tiny glasses of chilled pink wine at Thanksgiving and Christmas, I had my first taste of alcohol at Sophia's house, age 6 or 7. After a table of taunting Christian men goaded us toward an inch of vodka, maybe it was 2, my head spun and ached as we lay on sleeping bags in the formal living room. Light and shadows fell across our faces from the room next door, where some other featureless man faces from church, I can't remember who, and Sophia's chummy pagan uncles smoked cigars, gulped and guffawed loudly into the early hours of the morning. At some ungodly time, we were roused by unfamiliar noise. We stumbled sleepily towards the bottom of the stairs, where Sophia's older sister awkwardly leaned, nearly passed out. Sophia's mother placed her between us and instructed us, once upstairs, to lay her sideways in bed, to keep her from choking on her own vomit in the night. Did I sleep after that? This detail my mind didn't see fit to collect. Some summers I joined them on family trips, where Sophia and I drove recreational vehicles across cow pastures, our wheels flinging cowpats into the air, onto our clothing, our hair, our skin, roaring out to the creek where we swam and played all day. At night we ate dehydrated army rations all together at a long, loud table, packets of chicken a la king alongside freshly fried okra, desiccated ice cream after. Sophia's dad's hunting expertise and apocalypse readiness were another significant source of renown in our church. He was ex-military and owned an impressive arsenal of weapons, stocked in a concealed room below the garage, along with who knows what else. Nearly everyone I knew owned guns, but his arsenal could have armed a small militia. Perhaps it did. Once in a field, he placed an automatic weapon into my clumsy hands, along with a single word set of instructions. Shoot. These instruments of death were significant fixtures in the wildlife preserve I was learning to survive. One afternoon, Sophia's older brother and a friend appeared with pistols and waved them towards her and me as we played on a balcony above the garage. They'd been shooting squirrels and birds in the wood behind the house. Why not now these birds, too, perched similarly as we were? We cried out. Sophia's father emerged and matched their idiotic aggression with his own, whipping them both with curses and what object he could get quickest to hand, a metal bar. Months later, Sophia's older brother chose his moment, surprised her and me in our sleeping bags, metal bar in hand. We were as defenseless as worms, and he duly squashed us. Another time, Sophia's dad took a similar implement to her legs while I stood by watching, bracing motionless and mute against the wall. I can't recall the reason for this round of retribution, set off erratically as he was. One Saturday after I'd stayed the night, he drove away early and came back with take-out breakfast for all of us. For me, a ham and egg bagel in a yellow carton. This was new food for me, and I had an overactive gag reflex and couldn't make myself eat it. I instead closed the lid and said, "Yes, sir," quietly and quickly, when Sophia's father asked if I'd eaten it, his steely look signaling the singular possibility of only one admissible answer. He stared at me silently for a moment. Where, when, and what had this animal eaten? I was an open book to this trained hunter who possessed the skill to identify and analyze every available sign. "Open it," he challenged. I obeyed, and he, upon spying the uneaten food, said only, "Give it to the dog, then." Take the children's bread and toss it to the dog, for even the dogs under the table eat the children's rejected crumbs. Sophia and I never spoke at any length about all this turbulence in the flight of our childhood. The grammar of our shared language we constructed from books, treks in the woods, talk about fairies, games with plastic farm animals, songs to cows. In all this, we created and occupied our own habitat. The woods our sanctuary, the streams our dwelling place. I can still smell that deep scent of the forest, the creek, the thrilling fragrance of cool and wet and green. Anything could happen there. Once we caught a mole and imprisoned it for an afternoon in an empty hermit crab aquarium, its sad star nose searching for hours for the soil. At last we had compassion. We inclined to it and heard its cry. We delivered it from its bondage. Yet the agency that Sophia lost at home, she reclaimed at times in our friendship, often cruelly. One day of swimming in the creek, I stood on a massive rock I'd paddled to and climbed, she on the bank. She studied me up and down and dispassionately declared, "You're fat." Another day she pushed me in rapid circles on the tire swing in her front yard until I was sick, stood laughing at the sight of the circle my open mouth drew around me in vomit as I spun. She developed a particular habit of pointing out a set of items, any in the vicinity. "Which do you like best?" she'd ask. Whichever I chose was wrong, and she'd wryly explain why. "It's so funny you would choose that one. I'd never have picked it." I took to trying to divine which one she was likely to select. But I was never successful. That was the whole game of it. This has been No Love in War, a story of Christian nationalism. If you have appreciated this free audiobook and would like to make a donation to the author, please visit this podcast's Spotify site. This is No Love in War, a story of Christian nationalism.
Awful smoke for a rebel.
Written by Valerie H. Hobbs. Read by the author. With original music by Jonathan and Caroline Hodges. Originally published in open access print form by Mayfly Books. Chapter 5. Salvation, that is healing, is not simply ethical regeneration and the transformation of human character. It involves restoration of the whole cosmos, the Greek word for world. Salvation, in short, is comprehensive. Not everyone will go to heaven, but not all sinners will be sent straight to hell this evening either. As Christians, we have tasks of dominion assigned to us by God. We are told to be healers. We are to impose biblical law on society, which will begin to heal the institutions of society. Biblical civil law protects life, property, and morality, so that Christians, working individually and in voluntary association, can begin to serve as agents of healing in the world. Gary North, Editor's Introduction, Symposium on Social Action, Journal of Christian Reconstruction, 1981, Volume 8, Number 1. Diseases and problems do not exist unless the Marxist state allows them an official existence or recognition. Medical training is controlled. Doctors and psychiatrists are controlled. Hospitals are controlled. Drugs, like all medical practice, are a state monopoly. The medical profession serves the state, not the patient. Doctors are a part of a bureaucracy which has a state-controlled life and conscience. R.J. Rushdoony, Statist Medicine, in Roots of Reconstruction, page 499, Chalcedon Medical Report, number 8. Christian Reconstructionists don't always like to be called Dominionists. They can perceive this as denigration, a word coined by those who misunderstand them, and lump them in with groups and beliefs they disavow. But Dominionists are what they are. They believe that through the blessing of God on their own political, social, and economic efforts, the kingdom of God will grow until the earth is as full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. What distinguishes Reconstructionists from other Dominionists is their belief that the Old Testament provides a model of that righteous supremacy, its judicial laws applying to all peoples, all nations, all governments. These laws must, of course, be properly interpreted by the proper people, men, almost never women, who prove themselves through a show of theological expertise and argumentation, a concert of clanging gongs, those who pose in front of cases full of books for photographs, who revel in the precision of their ecclesiastical procedures, their recitation of precise propositions, who, when visiting other homes, assess its occupants by the volumes, or lack thereof, on display, packed in, filling up, running over, pouring out into the laps of everyone in every room, all their paginated intellectual gravitas. Bonus points for antique editions of certain theological texts, authored by men, always by men. The particulars of interpreting the law lead to many quarrels and the end of many relationships. Other Dominionists look similarly to certain forceful personalities to lead them in the path towards victory, though such leaders identify themselves other ways, such as signaling their especially intimate and charismatic communion with the Spirit of God. Such leaders often mark their worthiness with a story of God's personal word to them, the moment the Spirit appeared to them in a vision, in a crisis, while in prison or plagued by demons during a near-death experience, and declared them set aside for special use. For all Dominionists, though, the goal is the same: a theocratic state, or some version of Christian occupation of all secular institutions, the reclaiming of the land, the cosmos, for Jesus Christ, whether by violence or by some other coercion. Whosoever yields themselves to those with sacred authority, and by extension God, will together claim control of every mountain: government, education, media, the arts, business, religion, and family. Within the ideology of hardcore Dominionists, those who do not yield will be executed or enslaved. This reclamation of a lost Christian nation is the central unifying ideology of the Christian right. Spurred on by such lofty goals, Dominionism in all its forms attracts a lofty-minded sort of people. They may not all be entirely committed to the cause. They may not even wholly understand it. But what they share is a hunger for the recovery of something squandered or stolen, some unrecognized intelligence, the reaffirmation of personal potential, the justification of socially anomalous behavior. In all, some acknowledgement of previously unacknowledged worthiness. Predictably, then, most in our church school membership were escaping something or someone elsewhere. We drew in society's white detritus, wounders and wounded, people of privilege who identified as tyrannized, people of intergenerational trauma, arrogance, anger, secret corruption, those born to agricultural poverty, people of conspiracy, tax fraud, suspicion, violence and other abuse, anti-immigration, pro-segregation, people who spanked their children in supermarket aisles, who prayed loudly before meals in restaurants, people of malcontent, families ostracized for objecting to liberalism and inclusion somewhere in some way, now seeking a vessel to weather the coming storm. 2 by 2, according to their own lost kind. The shadows of our enclosed community enveloped them all, lifted them up over the rising waters of the condemned world, made them heirs of the self-righteousness which was according to faith in ourselves, more so in the fearless men we followed. One memorable family joined us with stories of how they'd fled Germany under threat of the state seizing custody of their children, perhaps even imprisoning the parents, since they'd refused to enroll their offspring in a local school. These were our homeschooling heroes, the sort on whose behalf the father of Christian Reconstructionism and of home education, Roussos Rushdoony, argued vehemently in courtrooms across the United States. Others came with harrowing stories of being fired from their jobs simply for being vocal against communism, the gay rights movement, and of course feminism. Nearly anyone with a story offering persecution porn was welcomed. The more they made themselves a public nuisance, the better. Such were we, our everyday lives mapped onto the unnatural habitat of incarcerated canines and their prey, a complex social unit orbiting around two spiritual alphas and their offspring, jostling for position, continuously controlled and controlling, suppressing and being suppressed, eating and being eaten. It turns out that most of what we think we know about wolf behavior is misconception. Wolves that roam freely tend to live in peace with each other, each family operating as an independent unit, working together for the best interests of their young and any other wolves in their care. All wild breeding wolves are alphas, and contests for dominance with other wolves are rare. Family packs may work together at times to hunt, especially in desperation. But wolves in captivity are a rather different matter. In confinement, in a zoo, what matters is what every animal can offer the captain, the kingpin, the head, and what place in the dominance hierarchy each will occupy as a result. My family lacked the correct social and economic capital to be much of anything to anyone in those early days. Even the possible glamour of our mysterious previous outpost meant little in the hierarchy of holiness. An elder's wife rebuked my mother for her shabby clothes our first Sunday in attendance, labeling us foreign instead of fascinating, a slight my mother's already faltering confidence never recovered from. Neither was my father suitably assured or even devoted enough to be selected for the dirty work that made the community go round. One Sunday service he was asked to assist in serving the bread and wine for weekly communion, then rebuked publicly and sent back to his seat, since he wasn't wearing a suit jacket, an item of clothing he didn't own. We were perpetually low-ranking, outer circle, a place where different rules applied. One of the elders hosted annual New Year's Eve parties, and each year a small subset of our congregation, including our pastor, would leave early after a brief appearance, bound for the more exclusive event at a certain deacon's house. One banquet for thee, and another for me. When I was with Sophia, I could claim some semblance of citizenship in these inner circles. But in our small world, in our struggle to raise heaven from the dust of earth, alliances were always moving, changing. Now I'm your friend, now I'm not. Occasionally, new families would join our church, and then their children would appear at the school one morning. Their arrival jostled all our relationships, and as the dust settled, we eagerly abandoned one another for the possibility of new friendships, new techniques for rebellion, word from the outside world, something, anything. A good proportion of these newcomers were people looking for fresh blood for their business empires. Men and women in expensive suits and dresses traveled the kitchens and living rooms of our church school, dropping tablets in glasses of tap water to reveal the toxins the city was using to poison us, quizzing us about all our physical frailties. Just look at the deal I can offer you now with this NSA undersink filter. I can give you these nutritional supplements for free if you spend this much. This spirulina formula healed me body and soul. It'll change your life too. They cunningly tapped into and soothed our deeply rooted paranoia about the boogeyman of postmodern culture, its science, its psychology, its medicine, its steady diet of, quote, nutritionally void food, which had, quote, released an epidemic of neurological inefficiencies on its young. They gave our overworked, exhausted, and lonely housewives hope for earning extra cash within the sanctified walls of their domestic sphere, of ascending to the pinnacles of otherworldly success we were undoubtedly worthy of. Did we think our child had a learning difficulty? Did we suffer from a chronic illness of some kind? If only we were willing to free our minds from government brainwashing, to seek alternative solutions from so-called experts ahead of their time, unrecognized voices operating outside the profane establishment, people as misunderstood as we. If only we would, we could be transformed body and soul, cleansed from the sin of the surrounding culture, return to our tents with great riches and honor. It's difficult to say when our community and others like it began to more radically reject modern medicine, dental treatment, vaccinations. But for decades, pyramid schemes affirmed and exacerbated an already growing mistrust in science, modern medicine, and above all, the state. This would become even more glaringly evident in 2020, when Georgia Right to Life, closely linked to my church school, voiced opposition to a COVID-19 vaccine on the misguided assumption that it was developed using aborted fetal cells. Eventually, most of these opportunistic nomads would tap out the market of our small community and move on to despoil the green pastures of other congregations, though not before recruiting certain members of the church as loyal subcontractors to mop up any reserves left behind. One couple stands out in my mind, she a fashion model and he a silver salesman of unknown age. They owned a private jet, appeared at church events in 5-minute increments in their Porsche. By instinct, they knew who to flatter, who to incentivize, who to ignore. Our pastor and his wife seemed to perceive their presence as another feather in their cap. Look what glamour and success we can attract. After this couple moved on, my mother and I were visiting a larger church in the area for a baptism or some such occasion. We passed them with their kids in the hallway. They gazed through us as if we were ghosts, the sight of us failing to register in their profitability scanner. Occasionally, some naive exception would find their way to our church or school, rarely both. Some generally well-meaning set, people of milder interest and commitment, attracted by a particular issue, unaware of or possibly disinterested in the whole package. Don't ask, don't tell. Such times were my only true Christmases, the advent of the loveliest friendships of my childhood. One girl living with her grandparents was assigned a desk near mine, and we quickly formed an attachment. My parents are jewelers, Marie said proudly. She saw them only during summers, told me confidently that they traveled every other month of the year to source gems. I imagined them as enviously cosmopolitan, an enigmatic duo with special access to the world's back rooms and locked boxes. I knew too little to doubt Marie. It was like something from a book, and through her I sensed the possibility of other places, other people. One summer she invited me to come and stay with her and her parents for a whole week. The postcard invitation spelled out Wisconsin in pieces of clapboard, overtop a lake scene with a red and white striped umbrella shading an ice cream cart. Too wonderful to be real. My mother said, no, children roamed too freely in waterside towns in the north, and Marie's parents couldn't guarantee I'd always be within sight. Marie left our school a few short years after. Anyone who was kind or good or lovely did not stay. This has been No Love in War, a story of Christian nationalism. If you have appreciated this free audiobook and would like to make a donation to the author, please visit this podcast's Spotify site. This chapter contains depictions of violence against children. Listener discretion is advised. This is No Love in War, a story of Christian nationalism. Awful smoke for written by Valerie H. Hobbs. Read by the author. With original music by Jonathan and Caroline Hodges. Originally published in open access print form by Mayfly Books. Chapter 6. Obedience is the most necessary ingredient to be required from the child. This is especially true for a girl, for she must be obedient all her life. The boy who is obedient to his mother and father will someday become the head of a home. Not so for the girl. Whereas the boy is being trained to be a leader, the girl is being trained to be a follower. Reverend Jack Hyles, How to Rear Children, 1972. Better whipped than damned. Cotton Mather, quoted by B.M. Palmer in The Family in its Offices of Instruction and Worship, The Council of Chalcedon, 1989, Issue 7. God was everywhere and altogether absent. His name thundered down on us every Sunday. God spake all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. And so spake we all these words every Sunday. We had come out of the world, out of other churches. We had all come out, and now we were all in. A people of naught, defined by what we didn't do, who we weren't, not like them. A people of opposition, distinction, antithesis. Our yes is yes, and our no's no. Whatever you're like, I'm nothing like you. Whatever you say, I'll find the flaws, slice them out, carry on carving until nothing remains. We waited each day for the cut. Who would be next? Which one of us had erred and how? Only the abysmal, the vacant, the empty vessels could stay. We were a people of no substance. Thou shalt not. Following the example of his mentor Roussos J. Rushdoony, our pastor was the mouthpiece of God, the Spirit of truth, guiding us into all not incorrect precepts of men, speaking on his own initiative. Introducing any other Christian writer, any other leader, he always began with caveats, warnings. We could trust almost no one completely apart from him. The same stories perpetually flowed from his mouth on refrain to illustrate. He visited a man who lay dying, who dared to voice his desperate, feeble faith. Pastor, I don't think I can believe in a God like yours. At this crucial juncture, our pastor would pause dramatically before telling us the answer he stooped to offer. There is no other God, he blasted, his face quivering from all that drama, and then the hand, slapping the pulpit, and us by extension into submission, leaving us to stew again briefly until the judgment. The man turned his face to the wall and died. Our pastor often wept in the pulpit, moving himself to tears at the wonder of his own words. As a teenager, I took a black friend from an after-school job to our white church with me. Something's off here, she said. Your pastor shifts so quickly from hot to cold. He starts crying, then suddenly he's smiling. I don't feel right here. Her outsider eyes unsettled me. I quickly dismissed her insights, but they stayed with me. I sat, I heard, I believed our pastor had power over life and death, blessings and curses, could send me straight to the lake of fire as I deserved. He relished telling the story of the first meal his wife had prepared him, his favorite, but she'd burnt it, then burst into tears at the thought of telling him of her domestic failure. She rightly feared the one she loved, our pastor explained. Such is our fear for the Lord. As Sarah called Abraham Lord, every word that proceeded out of our pastor's mouth, his wife absorbed, endured, praised. She the perfect puppet. Once she related a time she'd burnt some sausages for his dinner. Unfortunately, not the only time I've overburnt his offering, she joked. On such occasions, she'd catch all our eyes with hers as she spoke. Whatever feeling we saw there, we were to imitate. This technique she also performed during sermons, rotating her head to find someone's face in the room, holding their expression with the intensity of her own, until it reshaped itself into a likeness that mirrored hers. Isn't he so funny? Isn't he so insightful? Isn't that point he made just so profound? Another regular sermon illustration involved a child who, perhaps seeing some divine quality in his massive girth, gazed up at our pastor as if to heaven and asked innocently, "Are you God?" One Sunday service, my parents happened to choose a section of chairs that positioned me in the angled path of the sun. Its rays penetrated the clear glass from an octagonal window high above the pulpit, and from where I sat, illuminated our pastor from behind. I imagined that glowing he might rise up in the air. I wondered whether others might join him, and who. Not me. I'd be left behind, rooted uselessly in the damned clay. Everyone would at last see my true nature, a worthless sinner. Our pastor alone was the way, the truth, and the light. No one could come to the Father except by him. Why would anyone consent to subject themselves to such tyrannical governance? This is the puzzle of communities defined by domination, violence, and consumption. My father regularly complained bitterly about our environment, and he made a point of rebelling in various ways, nearly all trivial, but which nevertheless dangled us all over the cliff of disapproval. He often darted straight to the refuge of our car after services, and remained hidden there until the rest of us were socially exhausted. I wondered what cost I'd pay for these infractions, and when. Certain years our church asked members to pledge an amount they'd tithe in total in the coming year, and my father would commit, and later back out, citing a bad fiscal year. By making and breaking promises, he clawed back some semblance of control. He did the same to us kids, in ways like those of our neighbor Michael's dad, always citing some ironclad reason for his sudden change of plans, based on variables we had no way of examining or questioning. We had a roof over our heads. We had our basic needs met. What else did we want? But skipping Sunday evening service was my father's most common tactic of subtly disrupting the church status quo. Our pastor glorified legalistic Sabbath-keeping, his stories on the subject casting molds of perfect obedience, which only the privileged few could set aside. The rest of us must melt ourselves into complacent pools of resignation, submit our shape to our pastor's every command. "This is not Mother's Day, this is the Lord's Day," he would annually remind us, before piling into the car with his family for a post-service celebratory meal, a feast for hypocrites. Neither was it ever Christmas, at least on certain calendar years. "The kingdom of God is like a certain quiet and gentle woman with stage 4 cancer, who nevertheless wrapped her hairless head in a towel, and dearly beloved gathered here together, she got herself to church." My brother acquired the skill of sleeping in the service while sitting up perfectly straight. I endured each tedious sermon, each accompanied with a tome of pastor's notes, by concealing a tiny treasure in my pocket and tracing its every bump and corner. As I got older, during the service I passed the time doing the only thing I could get away with, reading and rereading certain books of the Bible our pastor rarely, if ever, preached on. Esther, Ruth, Song of Solomon, Ecclesiastes. Proverbs was an absolute no-go area, as was any part of the Pentateuch, and the books of Paul. I absolutely could not stand to read anything written by the Apostle Paul. For many years, though, no matter which section of the Bible I had occasion to read, and I read it by choice only rarely, I heard only the voices of my pastor and other men who shouted us down from the pulpit, who rebuked and minimized us, who rejoiced in the privilege of our special status as dominion warriors, then proclaimed we were entirely unworthy of it, whose stale enunciations sealed me off from the Spirit. All God's messages were never mine, only theirs. We kids were further indoctrinated at school in the particulars of our weekly plight of rigid rest, writing a yearly essay for a certain Sabbatarian organization, intellectual display the principal engine of our warfare. What does observing the Sabbath mean to me? Morning and evening worship, always on time. Those who are late are not welcome. Remember the story of Stonewall Jackson's noble refusal to disturb the worship of the Lord with his tardiness. Never leave the service for any reason other than to discipline a child. Children who don't empty their bladders before the service deserve the resulting public rebuke, either from the pulpit or upon leaving. No hair covering your face, and especially your eyes, during worship. This shows a spirit of rebellion. No use of images of any kind in the service. No being distracted. No being a distraction. We who are above all distraction. No work of any kind. No swimming pools, no cinema, no shopping mall. A restaurant meal is lawful, since the Israelites at times used pagan labor. Such is our joy, for God is coming to judge the earth. All this and more we learned during regular sermons and illustrative stories, regularly appearing in the many pages of the church's regular magazine publication. In the company of the blandness of our church sanctuary's empty walls and drab chairs, our thoughts were sure to ascend to heaven, which appeared in my mind equally plain as the miserable earth. At the end of every service, our pastor planted himself at the church's front entrance. There he could catalogue our attendance, our attire. He looked on all our outward appearance, his point of access to our hearts. Even visitors weren't immune. And of course, there were the drawn-out Ask the Pastor sessions after the Sunday evening service. Only men and boys as young as 4 could speak in church, even then. One evening, a quiet and gentle elderly widow forgot herself, raised her hand to make some query, and was admonished by the pastor with a single, overly familiar word, her first name. "Let the women keep silent." Special dispensation was claimed without explanation by the pastor's wife, who ascended regularly to the balcony and belted out some psalm, hymn, or spiritual song. On her soprano singing voice hung all the law and the prophets. Even my father's meager insurrection, mostly unnoticed by anyone important, was simply an exercise in flexing dominance, in shoring up his broken sense of self, shattered before any of us ever knew him. Some people are attracted to tyrants. They themselves might also become tyrants, often because it's all they know. By replicating and perpetuating this dynamic, they further normalize it, avoid the searing pain of confronting it. But there is also the pull of proximity to perceived power, and to the opportunities followers might have to bask in that power, to be recognized by, or perhaps even to resist it, to topple and take it. For the particularly ambitious, every rebellious act of noncompliance offers a glorious climax. Every pack participant confined to prison probes their place in the hierarchy of the hunt, feels the secret thrill of identifying those below them, maybe even gaming the system. All such acts constitute a venomous cycle of destruction. No one can survive by staying. We all jostled for toxic oxygen, girls and women absorbing all offenses from men in quietness, in all submissiveness, redirecting each negative atmospheric charge towards each other, an eye for an eye. We couldn't conquer except over one another. We couldn't live except another died. The American Southern woman is perhaps queen of killing by sweetness. But in this microcosm, almost any form of violence could be sugared with a self-righteous smile, with the proper grooming. Adults, as always, led the way. During my first year of school, a new teacher was introduced with this brief biography. "She spanks with her hand." That same year, we girls began ballet lessons. Our instructor was married to a member of the founding family of one of the first major pro-life lobbying groups in the country. She marched and protested abortion, picketed and campaigned with all her heart, soul, strength, and mind, then punished us girls for the transgression of being born, screamed at us in the central common room after school, exiled any girl who forgot her shoes or whose hair was not adequately knotted in a bun. Into the janitor's closet each errant girl went. From there, the seemingly ceaseless whacks of a wooden board against her silent body sounded out, reverberated all around us. These sonic vibrations inflicted their own vicious violence. Each thwack clapped the air, pummeled our eardrums, permeated our bowels. We stood still as statues, all we little girls in 2 straight lines. Talking was strictly forbidden during the class. Even when occupied by her fervent thrashing, she might hear us. The pastor's multi-room office was steps away. I recall also a teacher sitting steadily at her desk in an adjoining room. He never came, nor she. No one came. Sometimes our sadistic teacher moved our class upstairs to the church sanctuary, carrying out her cruelty boldly in the presence of the Lord our God. After one recital, some rendition of the parable of the 10 virgins, she showed a graphic pro-life video of blood and butchered body parts to our audience of family members and other loved ones. We were oppressed and afflicted, yet each girl did not open her mouth. Like a lamb led to slaughter, and like a sheep that is silent before its shearers, so we did not open our mouths. Brutal encounters like these polluted every relationship, beginning with my own body, my closest and by now most hated friend. It alone believed and answered the urgency of my need. In those early times of torment, I often feigned stomach pain so my mother might allow me to miss ballet class, speaking a lifelong digestive disorder into the world. Such was my commitment to self-preservation. In the 2nd grade, a classmate and I buried our daily grievances in the tomb of a closely guarded notebook. We met covertly in the woods during playtime to carry out the necessary documentation. We discovered a wispy weed, which to us resembled tobacco, and we chewed this as we discussed and argued, spun stories and moved names back and forth across columns at our whim. Girls we hate, girls we consider friends, boys we like, mean boys whose direction we agree never to look in. We absolutely promised each other, solely on the testimony of a hunch, not to speak to, nor even to look at the new boy Luke and his brother. Keep your eyes on the ground, avoid their eyes. A teacher finally spotted and confiscated our handiwork. Girls, what is wrong with you? Then there were the oddly cruel games my sister and I created. I suspect they were all my idea. One involving colored wooden blocks under a basket. We'd take it in turns to reach under and pull one out. If the block was blue, we were safe. If, however, one sister pulled out a block of another color, the other sister would punish her by smashing her hand with it. The angles of certain shapes were particularly painful, and we showed each other no mercy. I sat at my desk at school and daydreamed about shaving off the beautifully crimped blonde hair of a girl whose recent arrival had disturbed the delicate and dismal ecosystem I was still discerning. Having been subjugated, I too longed for a subordinate. In the absence of one, I would create her for myself, shave her head and make her suffer, as I had. This is how sociopaths form. They walk freely among Christians, among children.
We love our children. We love our children.
This has been No Love in War, a story of Christian nationalism.
Our children, we love our children.
If you have appreciated this free audiobook and would like to make a donation to the author, please visit this podcast's Spotify site. This is No Love in War, a story of Christian nationalism.
Awful smoke for a rebel.
Written by Valerie H. Hobbs. Read by the author. With original music by Jonathan and Caroline Hodges. Originally published in open access print form by Mayfly Books. Chapter 7. The Coalition on Revival views itself as a Bible obedience, holiness movement that crosses denominational and theological lines. The next step on its agenda involves the vision of mobilizing their people to get God's will done in their city as it is in heaven, to whatever degree that is possible before the return of Christ. We believe America can be turned around and once again function as a Christian nation as it did in its earlier years. We believe that wherever the pastors of any city in the world join together in unity to make Christ Lord of every sphere of life, and, with Spirit-led strategy, mobilize their people into a unified spiritual army, that city can and will become a city set upon a hill, and be a place where righteousness dwells. A Manifesto for the Christian Church, the Coalition on Revival Incorporated, July 4th, 1986. But does God require us to tell the truth at all times? Such a proposition is highly questionable. This truth-telling means not the exposure of our privacy, but bearing a true witness in relation to our neighbor. It does not apply to acts of war. R.J. Rushdoony, The Institutes of Biblical Law, a Chalcedon Study with 3 Appendices by Gary North, 1972. The year before my 10th birthday, money somehow materialized and funded a large extension to our church school. Even more of the grounds were now covered over with concrete and asphalt, more parking to accommodate our pastor's vision of an expanding infantry of kingdom soldiers. A 2-story brick wing of new classrooms, a dedicated church nursery, a lunchroom auditorium, a science lab. These were our training ground. My 4th grade year was my first in this imperial expansion. As in the previous year, we were taught by the headmaster elder, a gregarious man who put equal amounts of energy into loud laughter and ballroom dancing as he did into strict student discipline. He installed a mirror above the blackboard. His eyes now followed us, glaring, even when his back was turned. One day, without a word, he drew a crude picture of a bare bottom. Whose? Below a splintered paddle on the chalkboard, threatening vertical lines around and between the two to represent repeated strikes from which emanated heat and pain. In later years, he drilled us on the catechism, installed a camera in a corner of our classroom, switched on one day without our knowledge. Its lens another male gaze to fill any remaining gap in his probing vision. Inspect us continually when he turned around or left the room to deal with some school duty. Our church school hosted our first annual Reformation Day Fair, strategically labeled Arts and Crafts Fair on public signage facing the street on the corner of our property, more likely to get bodies through the door and facilitate fundraising. These sideways methods were a notable feature of our overall strategy. No historian would ever be able to trace the tracks by which we amassed righteous influence. We would conceal our path, come in through the side door, omit certain details, lie outright if necessary. So began our annual tradition marking the launch of Martin Luther's Protestant Reformation, in his honor setting up various children's games and selling hot dogs, candy, and various odds and ends in a massive flea market set up in our sanctuary. That first year, my dad ran a booth where, for a small fee, attendees could hammer a nail on a makeshift Noah's Ark, imagine themselves fleeing the judgment of the world. Another game of archery guided our eyes and our arrows to a target outlining the 7 circles of sin. One of them homosexuality, a word I heard often, yet whose meaning I didn't understand. Encouraged to wear costumes, Sophia and I came dressed as a bunny and a cheerleader. The following year, to encourage more explicitly Christian costumes, a prize was given for best biblical character, and Sophia and I adopted the personas of Mary and Martha, though we didn't win. That first honor went to my brother for his cardboard-clad rendition of a Roman soldier. The elders, deacons, and their wives dressed as various church fathers and their helpmeets. The women cooked and served at Zwingli's cafe, while the men walked around in full costume, ensuring we were all carrying out our duties. In the evening, after the fair was finished, though our pastor annually preached against the celebration of Halloween, warning us often about the trouble that happens after the sun goes down, his son Matthew, a boy my age, donned some disguise of rebellion. Together with friends on the margins of our church school, he threw eggs at parked cars, toilet roll at the trees, and sprayed lines of shaving cream around his neighborhood. As time went on, our fundraising expanded. Like our peers at other schools, we kids began selling chocolate bars and coupon books door to door. Sophia and I committed ourselves to this unreservedly, marching around her neighborhood for hours upon hours, growing ever more defeated and enraged by the reluctance of her neighbors to pay premium prices for overpriced candy and vouchers they'd likely never use. Maybe the next door, maybe the next. The thought of winning the prize bicycle held up in the school chapel service as incentive propelled us on. We worked and worked to gain entry to the pyramid's pinnacle. But unlike at other schools, there was as always a spiritual element stirred into the mix, sacred pressure spiked with guilt. The headmaster's urgent reminder that the school really depended on us. We all needed this money. God himself required this money. His words heaved the immense burden of kingdom building onto our tiny shoulders. Another set of events was the church school's annual themed dinner auction, in service of which we kids were of course recruited again as volunteer waitstaff, dishwashers, greeters, cleaners. One was based on a Hawaiian theme, and elders' daughters Leah, Jenny, and I began the evening by greeting guests with a flower lei, dressed in our botanic sarongs and t-shirts, fielding more than one father's boringly predictable pedophilic sexual innuendos as they entered. Now I can tell everyone I got laid tonight. Our pastor announced he was going to run for U.S. Congress, even secured a personal endorsement from President Ronald Reagan. The New York Times briefly profiled our pastor's congressional candidacy, picking up on 2 peculiarities. First, that he advocated a government based on Old Testament law, including the stoning of those who practice adultery, blasphemy, and witchcraft. And second, that our Christian nationalist pastor refused to withdraw a campaign advertisement containing unfounded claims against his opponent, even after the Republican campaign committee acknowledged the inaccuracy. What cared our pastor for such insignificant details, like the truth, when there were such enemies to be battled, such worlds to be won? What mattered was the fervency of our belief in the corruption of the current establishment, in the predatory threat that loomed large around us. After all, Christians have, quote, no obligation to speak truthfully to those who have forfeited the right to hear the truth. This was war, and our opponents mere footstools beneath our feet. That same year, our pastor joined a crowd of like-minded Christians on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C., for a 3-day coalition, at the end of which close to 500 Christian leaders signed a Christian manifesto for revival. Among them were Christian Reconstructionists, members of the Latter Rain movement, the New Apostolic Reformation, and followers of Bill Bright's, Loren Cunningham's, and Francis Schaeffer's 7 Mountains Mandate. The 7 mountains being government, education, media, arts and entertainment, religion, family, and business. Mostly men and a few key women, united in their ideals of a Dominionist mandate. Together, they forged a plan for implementing God's kingdom on earth, casting out demons and bringing, quote, judicial and legal systems in as close approximation to the laws and commandments of the Bible as possible. In the weeks before the election, our pastor's wife presented her husband with a painting created in honor of his candidacy, as well as the man whose seat he was trying to fill, Larry McDonald. McDonald was one of our pastor's dearest friends, a notorious leader in the far-right extremist John Birch Society, and recently martyred, so it was said. He had died in 1983, going the way of all the earth when his plane, Korean Airlines Flight 007, was shot down, having strayed into USSR airspace. Our pastor presided at his famous funeral, and the Washington Post later quoted our pastor in a report on Kathy McDonald's failed attempt to claim her husband's now empty congressional seat. "The devil is one up on us for the time being," our pastor lamented, his politics and the mission of his God always and completely overlapping. 40 years later, the magazine Politico would consider the legacy of Larry McDonald, calling him a militant cold warrior and talented zealot who built his own mini-deep state. It detailed his paranoid practice of stocking purified drinking water and dehydrated food, his love of alternative medicine that led to at least one major lawsuit, his arsenal of around 200 firearms. At least one senator, Jesse Helms of North Carolina, believed for many years after McDonald's death that he had survived the crash and was being secretly held by the Soviets. Whether our pastor was convinced by that conspiracy theory or not wasn't then clear, but McDonald was frequently held up to us as an example of mighty men who lived out the principles to which all our lives were devoted. The painting our pastor's wife gifted to her husband depicted campaign signs in support of our pastor and his pal McDonald on the front wall of a rural general store. This event was covered in the local paper, and the painting's inscription contains a code immediately recognizable to all devoted to the trifecta of Christian white male supremacy, Neo-Confederacy, and Reconstructionism. Quote, names of men who promise to take us into the uncertain future by preserving the things from our past. Men who will honor history. This is America, at her best. The day of the congressional election, we stood all together in campaign hats, young and old, in a hotel conference room too large for our number, fully prepared for certain celebration. A television in the corner broadcasted the vote tally as it became available. Finally, the results were in. Everyone stared in silence as the reporter announced that our pastor's opponent had won in spades, 2-1. My eyes followed our pastor as he walked to the screen, glanced and squinted at his defeat. His face stamped itself onto my consciousness, stern and unmoving, full of hubris, a loser concealing his loss. Still, our pastor had courted some attention. Capitalizing on this, he and his pals launched the first issue of our church school magazine, The Council of Chalcedon, its lead article directing readers to the manifesto of the Christian Church that our pastor had signed the previous year. A national documentary series by Bill Moyers covered the anomaly that was our sect. Among his Reconstructionist brothers and Pentecostal compatriots, our pastor was triumphant, proud, prophetic. His brazen words laid bare his expectations of all his children. The lone father, narrating a staged clip of some of us involved in some contrived game in the expansive church school parking lot, our primary play area, he proclaimed his vision. In mere decades, kids in Christian schools like ours will graduate and take their positions, move into places of influence and power. Equipped with his teaching, his unbending example rooted in our consciousness, we would reconstruct America, the world. We would make for ourselves a name, no longer scattered over the face of the earth. Children in the Christian schools of America are the army that is going to take the future, he said. Our school was nothing more than a scam. Onward, white Christian soldiers. Perhaps attracted to this and other publicity of the promise of a utopian future, yet more families joined our church, our school. The early days, months, and years of every community like this are exactly the same. A band of hopeless people grasping again after some ancient set of broken promises, now repackaged, rebranded by another dear leader. These are the early days of eagerness, a facade of jolly communal meals and battle anthem singing, happy hands working together, shushing and slapping any early misgivings. Surely this will be it. We will make ourselves to be a kingdom and priests to our God. We will reign upon this earth. Yet we kids were by now already growing weary of one another, of little lives so like our own. The taste of monotony was nothing to me but bitter. I knew little of earth's reassuring rhythm. Everything was known and despised because it was known. Time passed speedily along in its sameness. What was one day, 1 week, even 1 year, but the same as all the days, the years before? I had no sense of any future beyond more of the present. Time moved on, yet we went nowhere. Nothing much changed. We stood still. Each day the hours went by. The date on the calendar changed. But there we were, fixed and frozen. I went with Sophia to a water park in the summertime, and we circled for hours in the artificial river. Its current pushed us along, round and round. We were in constant motion, yet passed the same scenery over and over. It was like that. Everything was like that. While each new family brought the potential of something novel, here and there a taste of fresh, liberating worldliness, some semblance of something approximating normal, This too was only facade. Still, Sophia embraced these newcomers, grew crueler and more distant, left me behind to fend for myself in the new awkwardness of puberty. Though maybe I was the one leaving her behind in our trip to nowhere, dressed to the nines in my stuffy mask of piety, instinctively the safest option for a girl like me, from a family like mine. I learned my stubborn body was decent at foursquare and kickball, games we were often required to play in school, where I could locate and harness the physical force of my flesh. Sophia's willowy, otherworldly arms and legs seemed disinterested in acknowledging the physics of an object's movement. Her strength emanated from elsewhere. The divide between us grew and grew. She and a new friend laughed callously at the homemade bow clip I wore in my hair, my home-sewn uniform, things I'd always donned. She announced one day she was going to have an exclusive birthday party. Only one guest could be invited. Sorry, Valerie. I could only invite one. This has been No Love in War, a story of Christian nationalism. If you have appreciated this free audiobook and would like to make a donation to the author, please visit this podcast's Spotify site. This is No Love in War, a story of Christian nationalism.
Awful smoke for
Written by Valerie H. Hobbs. Read by the author. With original music by Jonathan and Caroline Hodges. Originally published in open access print form by Mayfly Books. Chapter 8. I see a serious defeat before us if we do not seize the moment and rescue the children from the bondage of Pharaoh's schools and lead them to the promised land of Christian schools and homeschooling. Church history will not be kind in the remembrance of this disaster should it happen. Similarly, Christian families will one day ask, why did our pastors and Christian leaders fail to lead our families and children out of danger and into the safe pastures of Christian schools and homeschooling? E. Ray Moore, quoted in a book review by James A. Boyes, The Council of Chalcedon, 2002, Issue 2. In the 5th grade, I was taught by another longtime member of the church, a woman who cried when we girls stood at her desk and obediently recited Proverbs 31 from memory, who sternly sent us out to the expanded headmaster's office across the hall for rolling our eyes, talking and talking back, smirking, being loud, having the audacity to be children. Corporal punishment carried on. We grabbed our ankles and hung on through the humiliation. My main friend that year was Emily, the daughter of a water filtration system salesman. Her family seemed just awkward enough to allow me to blend in. Yet they too were somehow transcendent, another set of angular, ageless beings for whom mass-produced supermarket food was unpalatable, unclean. Her gray-suited dad performed his solemn duty one afternoon in our kitchen, warning us about the local government's death wish against all of us, the poison we were all ingesting in city water. Were we so dull? Didn't we understand that we are defiled by what we eat, that all these chemicals go not only into your stomach, but also into your heart? He offered my mother a special one-time only deal on a whole house filtration system, which my dad experienced as a challenge to his manhood. He could do better. He'd install his own system, which he'd find by himself at a home improvement store. No man who claimed to know better than he ever got his money. At Emily's house, I saw my first Apple computer, ate cereal that tasted of cardboard soaked in some non-dairy, non-Newtonian fluid, snacked on carob-covered nuts and raisins, and went swimming in her neighborhood pool. One Christmas, her mother invited a small group of us girls round to sew buttons and sequins on felt Christmas trees, surrounded by wholesome, wheat-free holiday treats. As one of the older girls in my set, I ripened first, and my long-suffering flesh gradually began to betray me. Certain boys began more assertively testing my vulnerabilities, commenting on my mutinous chest. "Do you have something in your shirt pocket, Valerie?" one elder son asked nearly every morning. Emily's mother gently suggested I might ask my mother to take me bra shopping, but this too I experienced as shaming, as I did all talk of bodies. Sophia gave me a much-coveted Banana Republic Safari t-shirt for my birthday, 2 sizes too small, then asked me why I didn't wear it. Her expression made me feel her wrong choice was intentional. A few weeks later, on impulse, I pulled and stretched this solitary piece of trendy clothing over my head for a church picnic. Its stiffly printed image of a lion enclosed me as in a cylinder, a rigid casing, armor. I felt nearly invincible. From then on, I donned this shield underneath my school uniform, until one sad day when the seams finally gave way. This too was the year eagle-eyed boys spied my bulky handbag I'd begun bringing to school 1 week in every month. They squeezed it for any sign of crinkly feminine contents. I sensed their eyes scanning and appraising me. How could they know about things I'd only just learned about, been startled by one morning? When the teacher was out of the room, the headmaster's son Timothy told the whole class of a science experiment he suggested we try. "Drop a tampon in a glass of red Kool-Aid. See what happens. It's hilarious." He nodded in my direction as he said this, anticipating some reaction to prolong his joke. One girl in our school, unprepared for her period, bled all over the bathroom floor, on her desk chair, on the carpet, to the abject horror of all the teachers. Inspired, I too inscribed my humiliation and hopelessness into the indifferent architecture. Thick sanitary pads flushed down into the building's bowels, my menstrual blood the pigment for vengeful feminine graffiti. I stared blankly, without remorse, as the headmaster sent all the boys out of the classroom one afternoon, then soberly reported the clogged plumbing, the exact itemized cost to the school. "Please, girls, this has to stop. Whoever is doing this, please stop. I command you to stop." I didn't stop. There was no stopping in a place like this. No one was stopping anything. My aunt started taking me in for several days each month. I lay on my cousin's bed, reading books, watching TV. My aunt made me banana muffins, brought me tea. Otherwise, she left me alone. How did she know to offer such hours of stillness I'd not known till now, a peace that passed all understanding, a rest that only Earth's primordial molecules, which, having fused and formed my flesh at my conception, could recognize and respond to? Still, as my body singled me out, separated me, I suffered even more anxious stomach aches. I began to press a thermometer against the warm bulb of a lamp, a ceiling light. Insist I was sick. Again! I'm sick again. My mother took me to various doctors. Perhaps I had a milk allergy, was bulimic, had an ulcer, had a leaky gut. In desperation, she employed the services of an alternative healer recommended by a woman in our church who performed colonic irrigations in her home on the clogged and unclean bodies of other women in the church. As I lay on her examining table, the healer positioned her hands in various places over my body, bent my hands and fingers this way and that, in and through the energy fields she said surrounded my body. She seemed to be listening for something, straining to sense with merely the hovering of her hands some hostile presence, some malignancy. Afterward, she prescribed a combination of various herbs and tinctures, black walnut hulls, lungwort, star anise, fennel, cinnamon. This pricey potpourri I obediently swallowed for months after, accustomed as I was to sprinkling sweetness and spice over the rancid stench of my distress. This has been No Love in War, a story of Christian nationalism. If you have appreciated this free audiobook and would like to make a donation to the author, please visit this podcast's Spotify site. This is No Love in War, a story of Christian nationalism.
Awful smoke for a rebel.
Written by Valerie H. Hobbs. Read by the author. With original music by Jonathan and Caroline Hodges. Originally published in open access print form by Mayfly Books. Chapter 9. The difference between a Christian and a Christian Reconstructionist, at its extreme, can be described this way. There are people who, as a result of war or accident, are basket cases. They are missing their hands or feet. They are individual human beings, but they are seriously incapacitated. There are many people in the church who are basket cases. A Christian Reconstructionist is someone who is alive, healthy, and active in the Lord's service. We are in the midst now of the earliest stages of worldwide judgment that will begin with an economic collapse. So God is shattering all those who are trying to live outside of His law. It could be 4 or 5 years before we see the full effects of it, but it's already underway. R.J. Rushdoony, Council of Chalcedon, 1988, Issue 2. At the end of my 5th grade year, our school celebrated its first graduating class. Providentially, all 3 students were from families in our church body, our church magazine proudly reported, alluding to our pastor's dual decree. First, that no child is safe in the hands of state schooling. And second, that our school was both a worthy and righteous substitute for our atonement. This edict we kids of course internalized. A group of boys, including the pastor's son Matthew, ascended a tree overhanging the street next to our school and threw rocks at a passing school bus. "Pagans!" they crowed. Thus they prevailed over the Philistines with the strength of their arms and a handful of stones. A picture of our church school's first 3 graduates posed on the porch of an antebellum mansion accompanied the joyful article, proclaiming our school's legacy of quiet strength drawn from the Old South. So our school sent them forth to conquer for Christ and his kingdom. A group of us made our church school presence known at an anti-abortion march that attracted a crowd of around 3,000, the largest rally for the cause our city had seen. A carefully selected group of we children, myself not included, accompanied a solo written and performed by our pastor's niece on the steps of the state capitol building, a banner advertising our school hanging next to them on the steps. Their words were pure propaganda, harnessing all the racialized power of the pure little white girl in service of white masculinity, her angelic voice pleading with her mother not to kill her baby brother. This, too, was the year I began winning the Cornelius Van Til Scholarship for Academic Excellence, this first time for science, history, and overall average in the elementary school. I was also awarded a certificate for exemplifying the ultimate Christian trait of obedience. I wrote a sanctimonious essay for the school newspaper on friendship. Be a good friend, and you'll soon attract good friends. So easy. It's as simple as the sun. I memorized and recited vacuous phrases like these, performed them, was publicly rewarded. Words and behavior that denoted nothing I knew of, values I had never seen. There was no goodness. There were no good friends, no good people, no, not even one. All had turned aside. Together we had become useless. The following academic year, my first in middle school, the headmaster decreed that our school would form teams and compete with other schools of a similar size in our area. We were now the Crusaders, our uniforms bearing the image of a knight trampling a serpent underfoot. We kids were completely ignorant then of our pastor's likely ulterior motive for this title. Biblical scholar Meredith Kline had, some years prior, referred to our pastor and his compatriots as crusaders with cult-like fanaticism. Ignorant of our strategic branding in these man wars, a small group of us committed enthusiastically to this new opportunity and traveled together that summer for preparation at a basketball camp at Bob Jones University. Our eager band included me and 2 girlfriends, Jenny and Leah. One sect of Christian fundamentalism met another, creating a conflict of laws. We were given a rigid and unfamiliar list of rules beforehand to adhere to. No shorts, skirts, or dresses above knee length. No sleeveless tops. No mixed bathing, and no swimsuits should be seen outside of the shielded pool area. No music, books, or magazines could be brought unless explicitly Christian, best to bring none at all. No walking around campus alongside or meeting up either on or off campus with people of another gender. At mealtimes, we were likewise instructed to segregate strictly by gender. That week, I ate rehydrated scrambled eggs and drank off-brand Sunny Delight for breakfast, an assortment of questionable casseroles, overcooked vegetables, and unidentifiable meats for lunch and dinner, separated from my older brother across the room. There were mandatory services morning and evening, in a darkened, dismal chapel with no visible windows. The chaplain said he hoped we'd all respond to at least one altar call by the end of the week. Anyone who broke any rule, skipped chapel even once, would be confined to their room until their parents could collect them. Included in the girls' timetable was daily choral singing, likely a subtle correction to any disruptions that the basketball sessions might cause to our training up in ladylikeness. That first night, the college student assigned to supervise us girls announced excitedly she was going to meet a boy. Safely supervised, of course, in an off-campus dedicated courtship space called the dating parlor. Her friends arrived in anxious anticipation to help her prepare in a dorm room similar to the one my two friends and I had been assigned. Its walls decorated with posters of Disney cartoon films, Bible verses written in bubbly script, precious moments figurines. Someone pressed play on a cassette tape player, and the sound of the Little Mermaid soundtrack started up. Hands moved rapidly around the blessed young woman's head, curling her hair, then spraying it, while others held up one voluminous dress for possible approval, then another. Finally, she was ready, and exited the building, 1,000 eager eyes watching her jealously from the windows above the exit. Years later, I encountered the echoes of this environment during a summer of Bible translation training after university. There, an elderly retired staff member invited us women to her room in the halls of residence once a week, to gorge ourselves on mounds of cookies, masses of chocolates and sweets, while she, a woman no doubt full of fascinating stories and wisdom, conducted a dramatic reading of the Winnie the Pooh books. Other times, we women students gathered in one of our rooms to watch a children's film and met up with the men in our cohort at a local water park. Even now, an older conservative pastor's wife I know talks about getting a group of women together to see the latest Paddington Bear film. When would we graduate from this school of the infantile, infantilized, and infantilizing? When can women put away these childish things? The Bob Jones University gymnasium was an oven by midday, and we girls took turns standing next to the industrial fans that stood in each corner, circulating the sweltering, humid South Carolina air. Many of the exercises involved individual dribbling and shooting drills, or one-on-one challenges with a BJU varsity team player, eager to put us in our place. In my billowing khaki culottes, I felt altogether awkward, faint, and crabby. Yet my two girlfriends seemed to enjoy themselves, chatted easily with the other campers, joined in enthusiastically with other girls in other rooms before lights out, to eat sweets, tell stories, and read Christian novels. What was wrong with me? Why couldn't I make the best of all this, as my friends had? What filtering mechanism did they possess that I didn't? What tool allowed them to transform all the many horrors that stared at me, that slapped me in the face, into nothing more than minor inconveniences? All that made me miserable, they shrugged off. But how? I felt ill every day that week, crushed under the weight of yet more conflicting standards. Eventually, I confined myself to my room, missing the last few sessions, where we were divided into teams for playoffs to be held the final day. I managed to pack my things and leave the residential hall without saying goodbye to anyone. I sat on the bleachers next to the soccer pitch with the families of other boys, waiting for my parents. I was no longer a camper, just a sister watching her brother now, as if none of this had ever happened. I'd never met any of these people. I'd never see them again. If I closed my eyes, maybe I'd disappear. Despite such setbacks from my week at fundamentalist basketball camp, I carried on with sport. My childhood ritual of riding bikes with friends around the block turned into daily, solitary, long treks up and down country roads. I exchanged secrets with my body then, learned to listen, respond to pain's cues. I pounded out my despair on the road. Every hill I climbed, I was heaving my hate of myself, these people, this place, this world, up, out and over. No one could ever reach me here. This precious time with myself was the happiest of my youth. Then track and field, basketball, volleyball. I participated in every opportunity available to push myself further physically. When I passed, when I threw, when I jumped, when I rode, when I ran, when my muscles ached and hardened, I felt strong, I felt able, I felt worthy. I worshipped and blasphemed at the temple of my body, the only sacred space I knew. Still, there was interference. Any moment of conquest or achievement could be sabotaged, claimed, reappropriated. 1 month I became determined to win the President's Challenge, a physical fitness award that came with a cash prize, which I learned all too late didn't even come close to making up for one of the stipulations. Our Bible teacher / athletics coach requiring all us girls to step on a scale in front of the whole school. Oblivious to this, I began lifting dumbbells in the weight room cum utility closet after school, when boys abandoned it for other scheduled activities. Sophia's older brother caught me in there one unlucky day, and I heard about little else for weeks, my arms squeezed and joked about, my every movement interpreted as coyness, repurposed in the service of men. Even adults joined in. I often played basketball with some of the boys after school, and for a time our pastor was their coach. Once he came out of his office to watch us, commenting on this boy's passing form, that one's missed shot. And oh, just look at how lovely Valerie looks with her flushed cheeks. Everyone, look. I didn't know what to do. Awkwardly, I carried on playing, unsuccessfully ignoring all the eyes our pastor had trained towards me. Whether attempting the same passes, the same shots, whether I ran in this way or that, whatever move my body made, the benchmark was always man desire. Look at her, disciplining her body, making it our slave, so that after she has toned her body, we will not disqualify her from our lust. Perhaps one of the most humiliating episodes of this was after one of my high school triumphs, a winning shot in the last second of the finals of a basketball game in our small private school league. At the sound of the buzzer, a boy called Luke ran onto the court and lifted me up into the air, parading me around in glory. My win was his win, his friend's victory too. Look at our girl. Now look at me. Look what we did. I think of this now when I hear of a man proposing to his girlfriend as she graduates from university, or bestowing on her some expensive public gift of jewelry in front of a crowd when she finishes medical school, achieves something, anything for herself. Her special moment is his. You are mine. Everyone now witness me claiming her. See what I have? See what she can do when she's with me? This has been No Love in War, a story of Christian nationalism.
You
If you have appreciated this free audiobook and would like to make a donation to the author, please visit this podcast's Spotify site.